Chapter 1. The Inheritance. The letter arrived on a Monday, just as Marco returned to his rented apartment on the outskirts of the city. He was about to order a cheap pizza and spend the rest of the evening mindlessly scrolling through his phone. The envelope was yellowed with age, as if it had been sitting in his mailbox not for days but for months. On the back was an unfamiliar seal and a crooked handwritten address. Yasenivka Village. Marco frowned. He had only heard that name once in his entire life, from his grandmother. She would occasionally mention the village where she had grown up, but always as though she were speaking about something distant and deeply unpleasant. When Marco was a child, she would visit their family every now and then. He often begged her to tell him more about Yasenivka. She never did. Instead, she would simply smile sadly and say, "You don't need to know about Yasenivka, Marco. Some places are better left forgotten." He tore the envelope open. Inside were several documents, a copy of a death certificate, and an official notarized letter. He had to read the first few lines twice before the meaning finally sank in. "You are the sole legal heir to the house and the parcel of land formerly owned by Hannah and Petro Levchuk." Something tightened painfully in his chest. His grandparents had died 3 weeks earlier under highly unusual circumstances. Distant relatives had found their bodies after the elderly couple suddenly stopped answering their phone. The bodies had been horribly mutilated. Their clothes were soaked in blood, and they were so badly disfigured that identifying them had been almost impossible. The police concluded that they had most likely been attacked by a pack of wolves that had wandered out of the forest. No forensic examination was ever conducted. According to the investigators, no human being could have inflicted wounds like those. And besides, who would bother investigating a forgotten village where only 2 old people had remained? Marco didn't cry, not because he hadn't loved them, but because, over the years, he had drifted away from his family. After moving to the city, he rarely visited. A few phone calls each year, holiday greetings, promises to come back someday. Now, there would never be a someday. The drive to Yasenivka took nearly 5 hours. The farther they got from the city, the emptier the roads became. Gas stations disappeared, then grocery stores, then bus stops. The forest crept closer with every mile while heavy gray clouds swallowed the sky above. The GPS kept losing signal, causing the driver Marco had hired to curse under his breath every few minutes. By the time an old rusted road sign finally appeared ahead, Yasenivka, the sun was already sinking toward the horizon. Marco stepped out of the car at the entrance to the village. After paying the driver, he noticed the man looked more than ready to leave, as if he already regretted accepting the job. Marco couldn't blame him. The village looked wrong, not abandoned for decades, not even abandoned for years. It looked as though everyone had simply vanished yesterday. The houses were still standing. The fences hadn't collapsed. Nothing looked destroyed. Yet there wasn't a single living soul. No people, no livestock, no children, no dogs barking in the distance, no smoke rising from chimneys, only the wind and the forest. It began immediately behind the last row of houses, dark, dense, almost black. The trees stood so tightly together that not a single ray of sunlight could break through. Without realizing it, Marco remembered something his grandmother used to tell him. Never go into the forest after sunset. Never. As a child, he'd laughed, assuming it was just another story adults told to keep kids from wandering into the woods at night. Now, he wasn't laughing anymore. The forest looked genuinely terrifying. For just a brief second, he thought he saw dozens of tiny red dots glowing deep within the bushes, like eyes. He blinked. They were gone. "I'm just tired," he muttered to himself. "That's all." Yet an icy chill still crawled slowly down his spine. The house stood at the very edge of the village, large, old, but surprisingly well-maintained. A sprawling pear tree grew in the yard, and beside the old barn, something bulky sat hidden beneath a weathered tarp. Marco couldn't help but smile. "Now that's interesting." He walked over and pulled the tarp away. Underneath was an old Nissan Patrol, dark green, scratched, worn by years of use, but still far from being a rusted heap of metal. "So, Grandpa really didn't sell you." He ran his hand across the hood, wiping away a thick layer of dust. Instantly, his grandfather's voice echoed in his memory. "Remember this, Marco. This truck will outlive both of us. Take care of it, and it'll keep running forever." A faint smile crossed his face. "Looks like you were right." He opened the driver's door. The smell hit him immediately. Dust, old engine oil, and something strangely familiar. His grandfather. It still smelled exactly like him. A ring of keys rested on the dashboard. Marco picked it up, slipped one into the ignition, and turned it. Click. Another click. Silence. The engine didn't even try to start. He sighed. "That's okay. We'll figure you out later." He stepped back out and closed the door. Then he turned toward the house. The front door was unlocked. He froze. That was odd. If something so horrific had happened here, why hadn't the police sealed the property? Why did everything look as though the owners had simply stepped outside for a few minutes? And more importantly, where was the blood? His aunt had shown him photographs from the scene. He remembered them all too clearly. The wooden floor had been soaked in blood. But now, there wasn't a single stain. Not one. No trace that anything terrible had ever happened here. The realization sent another shiver down his spine. Taking a slow breath, he stepped inside. The house was cold, not cool. Cold. The kind of cold that settled into your bones, as if nobody had lit the stove in years. Marco reached for the light switch. The bulb above the kitchen table flickered several times before finally casting a weak yellow glow across the room. That's strange. The electricity still worked. The kitchen looked almost exactly as he remembered it. The old wooden table, the stove, the cupboards, the faded rug near the doorway. For a moment, he could almost imagine his grandmother walking in from the pantry, scolding him for showing up without calling first. He opened the refrigerator. Empty, except for a single magnet attached to the door. It read, "Don't forget to lock the gate after sunset." Marco let out a dry laugh. "Very funny, Grandma." The smile disappeared almost as quickly as it had come. His aunt's photographs flashed through his mind again. He slammed the refrigerator shut. "I just need to finish the paperwork, sell the house, and never come back here again." That had always been the plan. Claim the inheritance, sell everything, leave, forget Yasenivka ever existed. The first strange sound came a little after 10 that night. A slow, dragging scrape, like someone running long fingernails across the outside wall of the house. Marco froze. He listened. Silence. A few seconds passed. Then it came again. Long, slow, deliberate. Someone, or something, was scratching the wood. Marco walked to the window and looked outside. The yard was empty. Only the old pear tree swayed gently in the wind. A cat? Even he didn't believe that. A second later, the scratching came again, this time from the front door. His heartbeat instantly quickened. He grabbed a large kitchen knife from the table. His pulse was pounding so loudly he could hear it in his ears. One cautious step, then another. The scratching continued. Now it was right outside, as though something was slowly dragging its claws across the wooden door. Marco stopped breathing. Someone was standing there. Then, a voice, soft, barely above a whisper. "Marco." Every muscle in his body locked. "Open the door." His blood ran cold. It was his grandmother's voice, exactly as he remembered it. "My sweet Marco, I'm so cold." The knife nearly slipped from his hand. The scratching stopped. Complete silence filled the house. For a second, he almost reached for the doorknob. Then another voice spoke, right behind him, quiet, tired, but unmistakably real. "Don't open it." Marco spun around. Standing beside the old stove was his grandmother, transparent, wearing the same gray headscarf she always had. She looked almost exactly as she had in life, except the wall behind her was visible through her body. Dark patches covered her pale skin, like the bruising left on a corpse. Marco stumbled backward. "Gee, Grandma?" His voice shook. "But you died." "I saw the pictures." She looked at him sadly. "Listen to me carefully. We don't have much time." Her eyes slowly shifted toward the front door. "The thing standing outside, it isn't me." At that exact moment, boom. Something slammed into the front door with tremendous force. The entire house shook. A ceramic plate fell from a shelf and shattered across the floor. Marco jumped. The door somehow held. "What? What is that?" His grandmother slowly closed her eyes. "They've come." "Who?" "They sensed that you came back." "Who?" Marco repeated, barely able to get the words out. She turned toward the window. "The ones born from the curse." "What curse?" She was silent for several seconds, as if every word drained what little strength she had left. Her figure became slightly more transparent. "Listen carefully, Marco. I don't know how much longer I can stay." He nodded without saying a word. Many years ago, Yasenivka was a thriving village. Hundreds of people lived here. Children were born. New homes were built. There was a blacksmith shop, a mill, a school. People lived peaceful lives. She stared into the darkness as though she were looking into the past itself. On the very edge of the village lived a woman named Olena. The villagers called her a witch, but she wasn't evil. She healed the sick, delivered babies, found lost livestock, helped anyone who came to her. Marco listened without taking his eyes off her, until one day, a newborn baby disappeared. The room suddenly felt even colder. The blacksmith's wife accused Elena. She claimed Olena had murdered the child out of jealousy. Years earlier, Olena's husband had left her for another woman. That was enough. The villagers believed the worst. His grandmother lowered her head. No one even tried to learn the truth. They tied her to a post and burned her alive. Marco swallowed hard. His throat had gone completely dry. She didn't beg for mercy. She looked every one of them in the eye and said, "You're afraid of my darkness. Now it will become yours." His grandmother closed her eyes. That same year, the crops failed. The following year, newborn children began dying. And then, people started disappearing in the forest. Marco stared at her. What happened after that? A faint, sorrowful smile appeared on her face. They didn't simply disappear. She looked straight into his eyes. They came back. At that exact moment, bang! Something slammed against the front door again, harder than before. The entire frame groaned. The wood cracked. Marco rushed to the window, then froze. Something was standing near the front gate. It was tall, far too tall. Its body was unnaturally thin. Gray skin stretched tightly over its bones like wet ash. Its arms hung almost to the ground, where its eyes should have been. There were only two endless black voids. A thick black mist slowly poured from those empty sockets. From somewhere deep inside its body, he heard the sound of a baby crying, soft, constant, wrong. A thick black substance, almost like tar, dripped from its mouth and from dozens of small holes scattered across its body. Marco couldn't move. He couldn't even breathe. "Oh my God!" His grandmother spoke without taking her eyes off the creature. "That's a hollow one. The weakest of them. It can't enter the yard." "Why not?" "Because I placed a protection around this house." A faint smile touched her lips. "As long as you stay inside, you're alive." Marco looked toward the front door. Now he understood why it had survived those impossible blows. Slowly, the hollow one lifted its head. Then, it smiled. Its mouth stretched wider and wider until it reached almost from ear to ear. Every hair on Marco's body stood on end. "But there are others," his grandmother whispered, "much stronger. And they're evolving." "What do you mean?" "They're becoming smarter." With every victim, the lights went out. Instantly, the house disappeared into complete darkness. Marco pulled out his phone. The screen lit up. No signal, not a single bar, not even emergency calls only. "Stay quiet," his grandmother whispered. Then, something echoed from deep within the forest. It wasn't wolves, it wasn't human. It sounded like hundreds of voices whispering the exact same words at once. "Come back, come back, come back." The whispers came from every direction. Marco felt something he had never experienced before. Pure, primal, animal fear. Every instinct screamed at him to run, but his legs refused to move. The whispers drew closer, closer. Then, something touched the window, softly, almost gently. Tap, another tap, then another. Fingernails, slowly tapping against the glass. Marco froze. "Don't look." His grandmother's voice was barely audible. Whatever was outside, it wanted his attention. The tapping continued. Then another familiar voice called out, "Marco?" His heart nearly stopped. It was his grandfather. "Open the door. I'm freezing." Marco squeezed his eyes shut. Every part of him wanted to run outside, wanted to believe it was really him. But he remembered what his grandmother had said. "That's not your grandfather." Her voice was calm. "Remember this. They always speak with the voices of the people you love." The whispering outside stopped. Silence. Absolute silence. It lasted only a few seconds. Then, a slow creak came from above. The roof. Something was crawling across the old metal sheets. Creak. Silence. Another step, then another, as if something enormous was slowly dragging itself over the roof with impossibly long limbs. Marco held his breath. His grandmother stared at the ceiling. The sadness in her eyes grew even deeper. "They're close now." She looked back at him. "And this is only the first night. To be continued